And we're live. Hello, hello. Hey, Rizèl.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm pretty good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited for today's talk.
Ah, same here. Same here. I love that folks are coming up and, in case you're wondering what we're doing, this is a little show that Rizèl and I are putting on where, whenever folks are available and want to do it, they can come and practice their talk with us live on stream, and we will give them kind, constructive feedback, to help everybody who's interested in giving public speaking or who's been public speaking for a while get more comfortable doing so. And we have one rule, well, aside from having a code of conduct, that the feedback must be constructive and kind. Kind is not the same as nice, though. Kind is helping someone improve. That's a constructive part of it. Um, yeah. And well, I'm not going to blabber on too much. Let's bring on our guest. I'm very happy to introduce Ben. Here we go. Bring him on stage. Hey, Ben.
Oh, that's me. Hello, I'm here now. I've been here the whole time. Howdy, howdy, y'all. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Thank you. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm super excited to be presenting this with y'all today because we're going to get into some of my just absolute favorite quirks about the internet. This talk is going to get weird. And so I'm so excited to share this with y'all. I've given this talk a couple of times, but it can always be iterated upon. And I just love sharing this with people. It's fun stuff.
Love it. Love it. Again, thank you so much for doing this, Ben. I'd love to give you a chance to please, tell us a little bit about yourself if you're not going to be doing that in your talk.
Sounds good. Yeah, so howdy. My name is Ben Myers. I am a front end developer. I'm currently working at Microsoft on the Microsoft Learn platform, formerly known as Microsoft Docs. I'm an accessibility advocate, so I blog about accessibility occasionally, and I host a weekly stream of my own called Some Antics, where I bring on guests from around web development and web design to teach me something about building great user experiences for the web in a hands-on way, typically with a focus on accessibility and or core web technologies. So just really hammering home those fundamentals. I love talking to people about accessibility. I've been doing it in just various forms for a while. And yeah, I'm just super, super excited to be here with y'all today.
Wonderful. And it's just accessibility is a topic that I just love so much, and I'm so excited to hear about it today, and love to see some people coming in on the chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. As said, if you're tuning in for the first time, we're doing a little bit of talk practice, and we're gonna give Ben some feedback to improve his talk. And like everybody else, if you're ever interested in joining in, you got my Twitter handle here at Hola Soy Milk. You got Rizèl Scarlett at Black Girl Bites. Get in touch. And yeah, let's bring on your slides. I'm not going to blabber on too much. Here's what we're going to do. Rizèl and I are going to hang out on stage here with you, Ben, while you give your talk. And we're going to be taking some notes. I was just showing Rizèl earlier. I've been decorating my talk practice notes book.
I adore
Very,
that.
very excited. It was really great to get my stationery stuff out again. And yeah, here, let's bring up, I'm not going to delay us anymore. Let's bring on your slides. And well, the stage is yours, Ben. Here, I'm going to move you. Can I do this? Yeah. All right. You're at the top left
right
now. And the stage is yours.
Excellent. So, howdy, howdy. Today we're going to be talking a bit about hijacking screen readers with CSS. And if any part of that statement seems weird to you, don't worry. We're going to get into some weird, juicy details today. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to show you some examples that just absolutely broke my brain. And if you have a reaction at all to these things, if you find them weird, if you're even like angered by any of these things, whatever, I encourage you to let me know in the chat. Like, I want to get a pulse of how y'all are feeling. So just feel free to just absolutely like stream of conscious, put your thoughts in the chat. Just absolutely spam Ramón and Rizèl's chat boxes during this talk, just because I want to get a sense for how y'all are feeling about these things. So yeah, without further ado, let's I guess dive into this. So this talk is going to have three sections. first of all, I'm going to bend your brains. I'm going to show you a mental model that I had of the web, and then I'm going to show you the examples that absolutely crushed that mental model into smithereens, into a fine powder, and just absolutely changed my mind about how the web worked. From there, we're going to dive deeper. We're going to understand how these examples came to be and why they are the way they are. And then we're going to take some life lessons from that, things that we can use on a day-to-day basis as web developers. So this is our plan. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. So first of all, I want to talk a bit about mental models, because when I was learning web development, there was this principle that was like hammered home into my head over and over again. And while everyone has different journeys when learning web development, I think the chances are good that many of y'all will have heard of a lot of these things as well. There's this idea called the separation of content and presentation, right? So you've got your semantics, your structure, your content, and then you've got your presentation, right? The styles that make it all look good. And old web dev philosophy held that, like, these two things should be completely separate. You've got HTML, which is solely the domain of your content and its meaning and its structure. Then CSS is solely about the presentation. Never the twain shall meet, right? Separation of content and presentation. And so a takeaway that you might get from this is that CSS isn't content. Some of us may even remember years and years ago, there was this experiment called the CSS Zen Garden that would have like one HTML document, but they would like swap out the style sheets, and the end resulting pages, even though they had the same markup, they would have like wildly different appearances and mood and atmosphere. The modern successor to the CSS Zen Garden is a project called Style Stage by Stephanie Eccles. And, these really hit home that like HTML, that's your content. CSS, that's your presentation. These two things, they're separate, right? So that was one of the earliest things I was taught when I was learning web development. And then I started getting interested in accessibility, and I started playing around with a screen reader. And you learn pretty quickly that screen readers care a lot about the semantics of what you write. A screen reader cares a lot that you've marked something up as a button or as a main element or as a description list and so forth. Screen readers, they seem like they're just raw semantics parsing machines. They're just there's this cold translation of the elements you use into screen reader experiences. And you also start to learn that like a screen reader doesn't know that your text is red or bold or underlined or italicized or any of those things, right? So you get the sense that because screen readers just care so much about semantics and they don't seem to understand CSS, because CSS isn't content, screen readers don't care about your CSS. This was this mental model I built. And I don't know that I would have necessarily been able to verbalize this at first, but you combine two thoughts of this like separation of content and presentation combined with screen readers care a lot about your semantics. And this seems to be the natural conclusion. And so I'd be very, very curious if this is, if any of this mental model is something that y'all have built up yourselves, if this is an intuition that maybe you have that you didn't realize you had it until I said this out loud, this sense that a screen reader doesn't care about CSS. I'd be very curious, so let us know in the comments. But this is the mental model that, as we'll see, just got blown to smithereens several times over. Just several examples that you encounter it, and it's like dynamite to this mental model, just blown apart. And so that's what I want to do. I want to bend your brains. I want to show you the examples that broke my mental models so that hopefully your mental models can be equally shattered and we can live in this sadness together. So first of all, I'll show you a relatively simple example. This is actually something that y'all are likely to have encountered. So here on the left, I've got some markup. There's 3 paragraph tags, and the middle one has this display none attribute. And if screen readers didn't care about our CSS at all, what we might expect is that a screen reader would announce, I'll be read aloud, I'll be skipped, I will also be read aloud. But on the right-hand side, we've got a demo that's going to show us what a screen reader actually says.
Area, I'll be read aloud. You are current, I will also be read aloud. You are current, I'll main.
Okay, so what happened there was it read, I'll be read aloud, and it read, I will also be read aloud. But that middle one, I'll be skipped, was true to form, skipped. The only difference here is that that middle paragraph tag had display none on it. So that difference alone caused a screen reader to completely ignore that an element even existed at all. This is not a difference that can be explained purely via just reading the DOM, right? There had to have been some understanding of the CSS going on here. And some of you folks might be wondering, well, does this happen if I apply like a CSS class or something like that? Yes, it does. It's not just inline styles. I'm just using that for succinct display here for the purposes of this talk. But yeah, so display none causes a screen reader to just completely be unaware that an element exists. And so this already provides a counterexample to this mental model, right? Screen readers don't care about CSS. Well, if that were the case, then that middle paragraph would have been announced, right? So clearly something funny is going on. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and start taking a look at a couple of other funny examples here. So here on the left-hand side, we've got the markup for a button. This button says edit. And then we've got some CSS that adds a pseudo element. And that pseudo element has the content of a pencil emoji. So previously, we've been able to see that we can cause screen readers to forget that an element exists using CSS. Now we're going to see maybe what screen readers do with these pseudo elements. Again, if a screen reader were just reading the DOM, we would expect the screen reader to say something like button edit. That's kind of what we would expect based on our mental model. But instead, what happens is
you pencil edit button.
Just in case you missed that, the screen reader said pencil edit button. The only way it could have done that is if it recognized that this pseudo element was there and that pseudo element was like contributing to the name of the button. So if you're using, emojis as pseudo elements or whatever, like that stuff could get announced. Or if you're using fancy Unicode characters, that stuff is subject to get announced, even if, it's this like fancy caret or whatever. Screen readers can still announce that out loud. So we are not just able to remove elements from screen reader output using CSS. It also seems like we can kind of kludge content in. This is really weird, right? Again, this could only be explained if the CSS were somehow being factored into the screen reader, into the screen reader output. So this is bizarre, right? We've been able to introduce content with CSS alone. Don't worry, the examples only get weirder from here. So here we've got a button that says add. I want you to imagine maybe we're building like a to-do list, right? And we've got this add button. Just to have a before state, I want to show you what this sounds like when the add button is read with a screen reader.
Add button.
It says add button. Oop, there we go. It says add button. And then it tells you that you're on a button, right? Let's say our design partners or our product owner comes back and they're like, hey, listen, we've received some feedback. This button isn't prominent enough. We need it to be big. We need it to be all caps. There's a couple of different ways you could do that. You could go into the markup and you could change the markup to be, capital A, capital D, capital D. That's probably not the best solution because then, if that decision ever gets reversed, then you have to like go find all the places where you change the markup and you're going to have to like remove, restore it back to the original markup. Instead, being enterprising developers here, we're going to do this with CSS, right? There's that text transform uppercase. So let's do that. And so now, as you can see on the right-hand side, we have this button that is in all caps, capital A, capital D, capital D. Now, we're all very diligent accessibility testers here. So we make this change and we just decide on a whim, we're going to retest our button. What do you think will happen here? Well, let's find out. Let's go ahead and run our screen reader against this button.
ADD button.
So if you couldn't hear it, it said ADD button. Again, the markup has not changed in the slightest. The only thing that has changed with our button is we have used CSS to make it all uppercase. And suddenly we have changed the pronunciation of this button from add to ADD. Now I should call out, this phenomenon happens specifically in the combination of Safari and VoiceOver, I believe. And that point will come down, Mayank absolutely nails that in the chat. Yes. Yeah, that whole point will come back very, very soon. But this is bizarre. We use CSS to change the capitalization, and that straight up changed the pronunciation here. Now, it turns out what's happening here, this isn't going to happen every time we uppercase some text. What happens here is that the screen reader receives that the text is capital A, capital D, and it's not sure whether that's an uppercase add or whether it's short for something like attention deficit disorder, right? It doesn't know whether it's an acronym. So in this case, it's erring on the side of acronym. This won't happen for all uppercase text. Just in this case, the heuristics just didn't have enough context here. And so that's what's happened in this case. But using CSS, we were able to change the pronunciation of words. And that itself should be a bit disconcerting. So this is one of the reasons I advise against setting text to be uppercase, CSS or no. Also, it's less readable in general and just poses various accessibility challenges. But this is one of those reasons. I've also seen at my old job, we had a logon button that was all uppercase, and it would say LOG on, stuff like that, right? You can get some weird stuff as a result of this kind of thing if you aren't aware of this phenomenon. So, okay, that's fine. But we can get even weirder. What I'm going to show you, this is again a Safari example. We are very specifically in Safari. And we've got an unordered list here. It's got 4 items in it. It's apples, bananas, cherries, and dragon fruits. And real quickly, I'm going to have the screen reader show you what it would typically announce for a list like this.
List 4 items. Bullet, apples, 1 of 4. Bullet, bananas, 2 of 4. Bullet, cherries, 3 of 4. Bullet, dragon fruits, 4 of 4. End of list.
Okay, so several things happened there, right? It told you that was a list. It told you how many items were in the list. For every item in the list, it said, bullet, and then the item name, and then it said like 1 of 4 or 2 of 4, right? It told you where you were in the list. All of those things happened because we used list semantics. We had this unordered list with a bunch of LIs. This is the default voiceover announcement for a list like this. But you know what? Minimalism is in. Bullets are so 2000s, right? They're out. Our designers have come back to us. They don't like the bullets. They want us to remove the bullets. That's fine. We can remove the bullets. We could do that, for instance, with applying list style none to our unordered list, right? And the bullets go away. But what happens if, us being diligent accessibility testers, we go back through and we test this with our screen reader again? What happens? Again, this is specifically in Safari. I'm using the voiceover screen reader.
Apples, bananas, cherries, dragon fruits.
Okay, so what happened here is basically voiceover forgot that this was a list altogether. It did not say it was a list. It did not tell you how many items were in the list. It did not tell you how far along in the list you were. It did not distinguish between items with bullet. In fact, this is the exact same treatment you'd get had you implemented all of this with divs. Now, you should still use unordered list, right? But just to call out, in Safari, we set list style none, and our list forgot to be a list, which is actively troublesome, right? We've used CSS to strip an element of its semantics. This is a problem, right? In this particular instance, there is a way to get around this. You could apply role equals list to the unordered list. As we're going to get to later, you may or may not want to do that. We'll talk about that further. We're coming back to that. But just to call out, in some specific cases, you can use CSS to strip an element of its semantics entirely, which very much so does not feel like the separation of content and presentation that we were talking about ahead of time, right? This is easily veering heavily into troublesome territory. But I want to show you one more example, the weirdest example I've found. Ramon's onto something here. Is this a Safari specific thing? We'll get to that. We will get to that for sure. So yeah, I want to show you the weirdest example I know of, though. And if you thought the other examples were bizarre, I can't wait for your minds to just be shattered at this point. So we've got a table, and I want to call out something very specific here. which is that I am not using the table semantics to their fullest. In fact, what I've got is a table element with a bunch of table rows with TD elements inside. You can and should use the full range of table semantics provided to you, including the T-body element, and you should probably have header cells marked with TH, stuff like that, right? You should have a T-head probably for your column headers, stuff like that. I'm actively disregarding a bunch of the table semantics here. That's the only way we're going to get an experience like this. It turns out in a lot of browsers, basically any browser that uses Chromium under the hood, but I believe WebKit and Blink do as well. So more or less every browser, if you have a table like this and you don't do anything fancy to that table, the table forgets to be a table, just as it is. So here's what the announcements are like for this table.
Rank, country, population, percent of world, date, source, official or UN, 1, China.
Okay, so that was necessarily a very linear experience, right? You started at the top left, you moved right, and then you went to the next row, right? However, most folks expect when you get to a table that you can actually navigate through the table in a two-dimensional way. You should be able to like go through the individual cells in a column or go row by row, for instance, stuff like that. And if you've properly marked up your header cells, then that should be announced as you go from column to column, stuff like that. There should be much more. But as it turns out, if you're not using the full range of table semantics and you haven't done anything fancy with your table, that's actually the default experience. It's bizarre. Again, we'll get to why this happens. This is actually intentional. But we can fix this. We have the technology, I promise. How do you think we're going to go about it? Actually, Ramón and Rizèl, do you have any ways we could go about fixing this? If you wanted to take a stab in the dark, I would be so open to your thoughts here.
I could give it a shot. Would adding a header row help?
So we could add a header row, and that would help. That would solve the problem. Let's go bizarre. Let's go more bizarre than that, given kind of the theme of the talk.
Oh no, not CSS.
That's right. So we can fix this table with zebra striping, as you do. So as the only difference here is that we're now zebra striping, and if we run our screen reader over this,
you are currently on a table inside of web content. To navigate the cells within this table, press Control Option and then up arrow, down arrow, left arrow, or right arrow. Rank, column 1 of 6. Country, column 2 of 6, row 2 of 11. China, row 3 of 11. India, 1,368,266,736. 17.5%. Column the 11th of October 2020. Row 2 of 11. The 11th of October 2020. Row 1 of 11. Date.
Yeah, that we all expected that result, right? That was perfectly intuitive and absolutely corresponding to how we intuit the web, right? Exactly. This stuff is weird, right? So we have been able to see, you can make screen readers forget that an element exists. We can make screen readers forget that elements have certain semantics. We can insert content with screen readers. We can trick screen readers into how they pronounce things. And as we've just seen, we've been able to restore semantics using CSS alone. What's happening here, right? Almost definitely, you've got a few questions. Believe me, I did too. I'd like to run through a few questions. One, wait, do screen readers read CSS? Do screen readers read all of my CSS? Why? Semantics are dead to me now. This one's not so much a question, so much as a statement or a feeling, but it seemed relevant, so I've included it nonetheless. And oftentimes people come to me and go, what are screen readers doing wrong? This feels like it should be a bug, right? This is unintuitive behavior that breaks our mental model of how the web works. And folks often pin this on screen readers. They'll say that this is a bug in the screen reader. And JAWS and NVDA and narrator and voiceover, they just need to fix this. As we're going to see, the screen readers aren't actually really the relevant agent in all of this. And that a lot of the stuff is actually super intentional and well thought out. So we enter the second phase of this talk, part 2. We're diving deeper. And for this, we're actually going to go on a bit of a history lesson. We're going to be joined by the ghost of screen readers past. So screen readers have had a very storied history. The first screen reader was actually developed back in the DOS operating system days. So that's when, there was no concept of the GUI, right? Everything was just text. The whole, like, you had a monitor that just displayed text. As it turned out, it was decently straightforward to pipe whatever text was in the computer's text buffer to a speech synthesis chip to announce that out loud. And that was how the first screen reader worked. But then this newfangled fad came about. Don't worry, it's not going to catch on. It's called the graphical user interface. And everything hit the fan because suddenly we had whole new paradigms for how interfaces worked, and screen readers needed to be able to adjust for that. And one of the first screen readers to solve this problem was Outspoken by Berkeley. So this is an example of what the GUI looked like, back in the glory days, back when we knew how to design, man, if only interfaces looked like this these days. This is the GUI for Berkeley Berkeley Outspoken, one of the first screen readers, actually the first screen reader to address the problem of screen readers for graphical user interfaces. And the way this screen reader did this, and the way screen readers down the line did this, will blow your mind, because obviously there wasn't like one canonical bit of text nowadays to show. There were two-dimensional layouts and buttons and radio and things like that. And so what Outspoken did was it intercepted low-level graphics instructions that the computer was sending to the graphics engine, and it would try to reverse engineer what those instructions meant. So it would say, oh, you've got some text in a rectangle. You're trying to paint some text in a rectangle. I think that's a button. This circle here, I think that's a radio. Oh, some color change behind this text. It seems like that might be what you're highlighting. It was like trying to guess at what the graphics instructions meant. And if your programmer fallibility senses are tingling right now, it absolutely should. This was a very shaky, unreliable system. And what made things worse was it would store these guesses about the current state of the interface in a database that called the off-screen model. And then as the interface changed, it would kind of more store like deltas relative to the off-screen model, and it would store those as well. So we have several problems here, which is one, if the screen reader guesses wrong at some point, then that error snowballs into future errors as the interface continues to change. Also, it's completely susceptible to new interface patterns coming about that it just doesn't know about yet. So this is an absolutely shaky, fallible system, right? Not a way to build a robust, reliable system, right? And so this off-screen model, eventually this paradigm had to be deprecated. But you might be wondering, hang on though, we could do something similar for the web, right? We can be a little smarter. Maybe we scrape the DOM and we create kind of an off-screen model of sorts based on HTML elements, right? We can't solve everything for every interface, but like, maybe this pattern could work for the web. And so screen readers such as JAWS tried this, and then HTML5 came out. And HTML5 introduced a bunch of new elements like the header element and the main element and stuff like that. And JAWS didn't recognize any of those elements. And so it would completely skip over anything that was in those hot new semantic HTML elements. In fact, JAWS users had to pay a hefty fee to update their version of JAWS to the version that supported HTML5 on the web, right? All because it was kind of doing this like guesstimation work of like how elements should correspond into experiences. And so we kind of tried different approaches like this throughout history, and we kind of learned an overarching theme, which is that reverse engineering meaning is educated guesswork at best, right? Anytime you're trying to take some intent and like reverse engineer the semantics or the experience and try to like come up with like what did we mean by this? It's guesswork, right? It's not authoritative in any way, and as a result, it's going to be heavily susceptible to bugs and poor user experiences. And so obviously this was a big problem. And so some of the brightest minds in accessibility got their heads together and they're like, hey, listen, we need to stop reverse engineering stuff. We need to have the source of truth provide an authoritative explanation of what the interface is supposed to mean for assistive technologies such as screen readers to consume. And what they landed on actually resides in your operating system. Your operating system provides what are called accessibility APIs. And those accessibility APIs define core interface concepts, like basically building blocks that every interface, every application is made from, right? So it could define, here's a checkbox class that every application that wants to use a checkbox can tap into. And so every time you see a pop-up that's like, hey, check this to like confirm like this thing, right? Whether that's in an application you're using or whether that's a browser rendering an HTML checkbox, under the hood, the application is using this checkbox object. It's the same primitives throughout your entire operating system, be it browser, application, whatever. And then, yeah, so here we've got an example. These checkboxes that you see here, they're the same concept under the hood. They're the same construct. We're creating sort of a lingua franca of classes, protocols that assistive technology specifically can understand. And these properties, these classes, they have properties that are meaningful, right? So a checkbox, for instance, could have a name like I agree to the terms and conditions or do not show this message again. It could have a checked state. It could have whether it's focusable with the keyboard. It could have whether it's currently focused, right? Every checkbox you use on your computer is under the hood effectively tying into this like single checkbox object that screen readers can understand or that other assistive technologies can understand. And so you can use these objects as building blocks to create an entire application. And we call this the accessibility tree. The accessibility tree is the collection of every object that corresponds to your application. So your browser creates an accessibility tree out of the DOM. We've got a whole workflow here. Let's step through it. Your browser receives HTML from a server. Your browser creates the document object model. Your browser creates the accessibility tree, which is an alternate version of the DOM that's specifically built in this kind of low-level operating system friendly version, like just like this protocol or a language that assistive technologies can understand. It's creating this at the same time it's creating the DOM. Your browser sends the sends the accessibility tree to the operating system. Dinosaurs eat man, screen reader consumes the accessibility tree from the operating system. This is what happens for every application. This is what happens for every website, every web app. Your web app is doing this because your browser is doing this for you. It is magic. It is so cool. You don't have to worry about any of this for the most part. And every time your website changes, your DOM updates or whatever, your browser sends a new accessibility tree to the operating system. And then when you pull up VoiceOver or JAWS or whatever screen reader or whatever assistive technology, your assistive technology is going, hey, operating system, what is the current application? And what does that application's tree look like? And what is the current element? This is how everything works. And it's all done for you. This is incredibly cool. As a fun fact, you can actually see what accessibility tree your site is generating. You can see this in your browser's DevTools. So here we've got the React docs up. And let's go ahead and see. There's this, we open up the inspector. And then up in the top, over here in the bottom, we've got, styles computed. There's this accessibility pane here. And here we can actually see the underlying constructs that are being sent directly to the operating system. And we can see things like what semantics led to this, or what ARIA attributes led to this. Fun fact, if you're building your mental model of the accessibility tree, the ARIA attributes that you might have seen, the only thing they do is modify an element's presentation in the accessibility tree. It curates the accessibility tree. So just a fun fact, things that tie into better understandings of how the web operates and how we make things more accessible. But you can see directly right here, this is the this is the accessibility tree for the React Docs homepage. And you can see that in your browser DevTools. And so you can understand where screen readers are getting various bits of information about your HTML elements. Super cool. This stuff is so rad. Okay. So the next point that I want to make is that browsers don't just make the accessibility tree, they curate it. Browsers have an opportunity here to optimize the experience that is assembled for assistive technology users to improve the experience. And they do this with intent, and they do this with expertise. Because I don't know if you know this, developers don't always follow best practices. And just because developers don't follow best practices doesn't mean that disabled users should be left behind. So browsers have an incredible opportunity here that they take advantage of to curate the accessibility tree to make a better experience for people who actually need it. And things might be clicking here. The subject of this talk might be clicking here because every weird bit that we saw with CSS is part of the browser's curating the accessibility tree. The browser is taking the various CSS cues that we've left it, like breadcrumbs, and it's reverse engineering intent from that to provide a cleaner or better or more expressive or more accurate experience or more usable experience for our users. And so, we'll get to the life lessons, but I wanted to kind of talk through some specific examples here. The example we showed of display none, right? Less so these days now that we have frameworks like React that enable conditional rendering, but display none is a very effective way to toggle whether an element is shown or hidden, right? It's very, very efficient because the browser doesn't have to recreate the DOM elements, which is the slowest part of updating the DOM or updating a page, right? Is creating those DOM elements. Instead, you toggle display none and the element is hidden. But if an element is hidden that way, you probably don't intend as a developer for anyone to get to it, right? That element should good as just simply not exist, right? And so browsers look at this and go, well, the developers who are using display none clearly don't intend for anyone to access this. And so therefore Screenreader users shouldn't be able to get to it either. So we're just going to straight up cull that element from the accessibility tree. It just does not exist. The Screenreader isn't skipping over it. The Screenreader simply is just never told that that element exists. And then you get to other concerns, like we talked about pseudo elements, right? We as developers can make highfalutin stances about, content and presentation, but as far as our users are concerned, the presentation is part of the content, right? That line is so blurry. No user cares at all whether a pseudo element is like a real DOM element or whatever. It's part of the content for them. And so therefore, it's part of what users experience. And therefore, it should probably be part of what Screenreader users experience. And so it's an intentional decision that has since been encoded in the specs for how browsers expose these elements, that if certain elements have pseudo elements, those pseudo elements are included in the name of the element that's exposed to assistive technology. Stuff like that. And so as you can see, like these tricks here, they're all accounting for developer behavior, right? And we had talked a bit about that weird case with Safari, right? It's actually WebKit. WebKit and the lists, where if you remove the list styles from an element, from a list element, then the list forgets to be a list. There's a whole Twitter thread. I should find it. I need to find it, but it's from someone who was on like WebKit's accessibility team. Basically, at first, WebKit was not properly exposing lists at all, and then they sort of like turned it on like a light switch, and they got so many complaints from users that like developers were overusing lists. And so the WebKit team made the conscious decision to say, okay, well, if you make your list look not like a list to like reduce that visual noise, then equivalently, we should reduce that noise for Screenreader users. And so they said, if you style your list to not look like a list, then it's just not semantically going to be a list. This is an intentional decision they made. And so now we're kind of, as developers, in this point of like, well, we now have to decide, do we really intend for this to be a list? We have to opt into like, should we put role equals list on our unordered list? Stuff like that. So now we get into the, thank you, Mayunk, for sharing the link. Fantastic. Now we get into these kinds of life lessons. First of all, test, right? Anytime you make changes like this, test, because while not every CSS is going to impact Screenreader output, some CSS absolutely will, especially when it influences what users think of as the content on our page. So test often and test early and test across a variety of assistive technologies as well as a variety of browsers, because we have several parts in the flow that now can all have an influence, right? There's the developers choosing what markup and styles to apply. There's the operating system that decides at a fundamental level what primitive UI controls can even exist in an application. There's the browser that then decides how to map the HTML elements to the operating system controls. And then there's the screen reader or other assistive technology, which decides how to take what the browser and operating system have kind of melded together as this like mental model of your application and decide to turn it into an experience, right? There's several points of variance there. And so you need to be testing across multiple browsers, operating systems, and assistive technologies to ensure you have a robust sense of what your users are actually experiencing. But the other takeaway I want to give is that of the cow path. If you're not familiar, a cow path in the real world is like, this is a path that was never intended to be a pathway. It's more a shortcut that was trodden over so many times that the grass around it has started to die and it's become a pathway irrevocably. But what you can do is you can look at those cow paths and you can decide, well, clearly folks are finding these more usable. So we're going to, quote, pave the cow path. We're going to make it into a proper, refined path. And browsers right here are paving the cow paths. They're taking developer experience, developer behavior, and they're trying to account for that when they're deciding how to expose our website, our web apps to assistive technologies. They're taking into account the tricks and tips that and hacks and whatever, the cruft, the kludge, whatever. They're trying to make a usable experience out of all of that. I showed the example of the table, and this really hits home for me because the reason that the table actually seemed broken by default is because back in the days of yore, it was common to use tables for layout, right? So you could position things in two-dimensional space using tables. This was fairly convenient, but woefully inaccessible. And so what every browser is doing, every browser has this somewhere in their engine. They guess as to whether the table that you're using is supposed to be for layout or whether it's being used to show tabular data. And if it thinks it's being shown as layout, then it'll actually basically interpret it as a bunch of divs to try to make the experience better for users who would otherwise be forced to deal with a cumbersome table for something that tables weren't intended for. And they then have, well, okay, if you have like meaningful styles that clearly paint this as a table, then we'll kind of reverse engineer in the table semantics for you. And so that is the browser actively accounting for developer behavior and the patterns that used to be super common. And this doesn't stop. Like we as developers, we building websites in this day and age, we set forth patterns that who knows, the browsers 10, 20, 30 years from now might have to have some sort of obscure if check for it. If outdated legacy pattern from 2022 do this other thing to improve the experience. And so this is why we really, really need to lean into, the specs, the standards, right? Focus on keeping things as close as possible to standard track and avoid using hacks and tricks and stuff like that. Be mindful of the patterns that we set, because someday that might be the weird kludge that down the road, some future Ben Myers is going to be talking and be like, hey, did you know the browsers are doing weird things to account for this? So this is incumbent on all of us to be mindful of the patterns we use and the hacks that we introduce, because those have a tremendous legacy. By the way, I just also really quickly wanted to show you, here's actually in the Chromium source code, the logic that basically checks for, is this a table that's being used for data? And here's the bit that actually handles the zebra striping. Lest you think I'm faking any of this. This is actual code that exists to check if you're zebra striping, right? This lives in every browser, more or less. So be mindful of the patterns that you're introducing to the web that will have to be accounted for. Because who knows what the next hijacking assistive technology with some obscure thing will be. At this point, I'd love to be able to answer some questions y'all have, or just kind of hear some of y'all's thoughts and receive y'all's feedback as to this. Screen readers, they're weird, and you can, it turns out, hijack them with CSS.
Amazing. Great talk.
Wow. Folks, could I please kick this off by asking everyone to please, I mean, Ben, can we please give them just a splattering of clap emojis, heart emojis, your your emoji of choice in the chat, because wow, that was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
This was super fun and super informative. But I don't
And
want to go
terrifying?
first.
I hope it was a little terrifying.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was concerned.
Yeah. I don't want to. I don't. Sorry.
Yeah, Rizèl, you had a comment in there, Rizèl, that was just like, oh, I'm doing so many things wrong with accessibility. Like every time I've given this talk, like I've watched as people's faces have just like paled in terror as they're like, I've written that code. I've done that.
I'm like, I am not paving the way very well.
Yeah, this is a lucid reminder that just because we think we're doing accessibility right, we may not be fully. But in fact, a note I have here is, oh gosh, I need to go check all of my sites. But before I
do
sorry.
audits of personal sites at some point, so send it my way, and I'm happy to take a look at it sometime.
That's very kind. Thank you. I'll take you up on that. But Rizèl, I want to give you the opportunity to go first and offer some feedback.
Okay. Let me go to. I wrote in a Google Doc this time. I said, super engaging. You didn't lose my interest at any point. I had no clue that like CSS had such an impact. Like when I learned the little bit I learned about accessibility, there's a real focus on like HTML, making sure you write alt tags. So like that's my knowledge of it. But I loved like how you listed out what we will talk about. I thought it was very visually appealing, easy to read. I loved the call out to the CSS Zen Garden. I loved the examples and demos you gave. It was really like illustrating the point, especially like the ADD versus the add example. What else? I loved the switch to the part 2 diving deeper. I liked your humor on like you said something about the graphical user interface and you're like, don't worry, it's not going to catch on. I thought that was great. I love the history lesson. I think the line where you said reverse engineering engineering meaning is educated guesswork at best. That was great. Loved learning about the accessibility tree and how browsers curate that. And I liked that you kind of ended us off with like inspiring us that we are responsible or play a part in creating these patterns. The only improvement, I guess, was I wanted to see the source code a little bit longer. I don't know if I'm echoing, sorry y'all. But see the source code a little bit longer for the Chromium thing, and it was a little bit small. Yeah, but I was like really curious about that. And then this is going to be dumb, so I think this is just me because it looked like the chat understood. I didn't understand the reference about dinosaurs eat man, so I was confused.
Oh, that is a Jurassic Park reference.
Okay.
God, what's the full thing? It's something like God invents dinosaurs, God kills dinosaurs, like God invents man, something like that.
Okay.
Man invents dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs eat man.
Dinosaurs eat man. Woman inherits the earth, or something like that, I think is what it is. But it was a throwaway Jurassic Park reference.
Gotcha. It looked like the chat understood it because I was like, what? But then I saw the chat say something and I was like, okay. But that's it. I thought it was amazing.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. I'd love to offer just a reminder. I dropped this in the chat, but folks in the chat, if you're watching and you've got some feedback, be sure to keep it kind and constructive, please. But please do offer it because that's what we're here to do. Okay, I'll run through my bullets here. Let's see. I love the structure, like the way you introduce what we're going to be talking about. Super cool. The flow and cadence of this talk is spectacular. I agree with Rizèl. My jaw hit the floor when you flow. Like I've got a note here. Segue chef's kiss to part 2. Fabulous. there on the constructive side, there were a couple of slides where I felt they were there for a bit too long.
Sure.
Particularly at the beginning, there was like an empty slide before you introduced that what is it? Screen readers don't care about CSS or something like that. What is it? Screen readers don't care about CSS content.
Yeah,
Where I
it
was
was
just,
CSS isn't content, therefore screen readers don't care about it, I think is what that slide
that's it.
says.
That's it.
Yeah.
This is again, this is just something I felt. I don't think it's wrong per se, but there was a part of me that was kind of like, anticipating the content, and maybe that was a buildup that was intentional. That if so, super cool. But there were a couple moments where I was like, getting eager to see what was up. Let's see. The keeping us guessing, fantastic. The demo parts at the beginning where you were quizzing us, not really, quizzing / encouraging the audience participation engagement was incredible. Love that. You did this. I have a note here. Does it make sense to mention that this is the voiceover we're working with, which you did get to, but maybe I was wondering if it might make sense to introduce that right from the get-go? Because I think the first demo had some voiceover, and maybe folks who don't know much about screen readers might like to know that this is the Apple-specific voiceover. Maybe throwing it out there.
One of the things I will say that makes that trickier is that some of those things are consistent regardless of what browser or screen reader you're using. And then some of them are well, this is just a weird Safariism. But I think what I might need to do is add onto the slide, for instance, test it on this video is Safari and voiceover, Chrome and voiceover, or whatever, and make it clear in the speech, specifically when it broadly applies versus specifically applies.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Just throwing it out there. Let's see what else. I was wondering if it might make sense. The table example, which again, wow. Might it make sense to maybe make it either a little bit bigger or a little less condensed?
You mean showing the Chromium source code for the table?
No, I meant the table example itself in part 1. I might have found it just maybe a touch overwhelming to have so much data on it, and I was wondering if maybe it could be a little bit less condensed. Just again, just things I notice.
Absolutely.
Let's see what else. Interaction is fire. Segue chef's kiss. History lesson in the middle, super cool. There was a part right when you had when you were talking about that first Apple. I forgot the name. I'm sorry. The first Apple screen reader.
Berkeley Outspoken.
That's the one. You were talking about scraping the DOM. I was wondering if it might help to have a different slide there to move on from Berkeley.
Okay.
Because it felt like maybe we could look. I don't know, when you're talking about scraping the DOM and building a model, I was like, ooh, maybe an illustration here might be nice.
Totally.
Again, throwing out ideas. No, that's a question. I'll save it for later. Love the life lessons. Love how we came back to lists. Yeah, when you brought back the list example of this is why it's weird, and then near the end of the talk, I'm let me rephrase that. First, you're like, this is weird, and then you come back to it and this is why it's weird. Super cool. Loved that. Should we have, you have that life lesson slide, and then you start with that first life lesson test. And I was wondering, I don't know why I'm so slide driven today. Might it make sense to have the word test there somewhere, just to sort of keep that flow going? Again, throwing it out there. And the call to action at the end. What was the call to? The call. There was a part where you were talking about call to actions, and I think you still had the cow path slide up. And I was wondering if it might make sense to have, again, some kind of using the slides to sort of dictate your flow. There might be really good. Again, personal preference, just things that I noticed. This is just really minor issues in what is otherwise a phenomenal talk, and that's all I have. This was super cool. Let me drop in. I bookmarked a couple of comments from the chat that I just wanted to highlight, if I may. We have Homie Coder saying, I hadn't considered that. Thank you for the brain bend. Agars is saying, hey, everyone. I just wanted to say that this is an interesting topic to talk about. Oh yeah, I agree with Rizèl on this. This right here, like I can see people like quoting this on Twitter, just like picture of the talk, a picture of you giving the talk, and this, because what magnificent. I wanted to highlight.
Iconic.
It is iconic. And I love what Rizèl said here that I also wanted to highlight. Honestly, businesses need to give us more time as developers to prioritize accessibility, security, and testing. The Russian focus on shipping features that employers place on developers encourages them to deprioritize awesome things like this. And we got Mayank, who I think shared that thread that you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
So go check it out, folks. And let's see. I think does anybody in the chat have some feedback? I have one comment here from Mayank saying like the table was a bit dense, but other than that, it's all clap emojis. Jen saying it was really awesome. Mind absolutely blown. Amazing, Ben. And yeah. Oh, Mayank also saying the code was a bit small, too small to read.
Yeah.
I do think that code bit is specifically referring to the when I showed the Chromium source code.
Oh,
which
yeah,
that's fair.
Also, I just wanted to say you were really good at reading the chat and paying attention to our faces and giving the talk. Usually, I cannot read the chat because I'll get distracted. So you're really good at that.
You know what it is? I've been streaming for like 1 year and 3/4 now, I think. And it's just like the default instinct is like, oh, I gotta check the chat.
I feel you. I've been streaming for about that amount of time too, and I'm also like it feels like a new sense of like doing all the things at the same time.
That's funny.
Ooh, homie's got some good comments.
Yeah, let's read it out. The flow is good as it stands. Just think it may sink in a tad more with a little bit more space. If your talk can support a couple questions or breaks, it would let your audience clean their palate. That is interesting.
I like that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Got another one here from Homie Coder. We only need to note. We only need to clean our palate when we are tasting something of excellence and want to make sure we can absorb every little bite and enjoy. Your talk was so tasty. I love this. Maybe a small pause or an acknowledgement of one question if it fits in when switching between subtopics. You had so much really good info just to get a second from the fillet you served us. I love this.
Thank you. That is incredibly kind, homie.
Yeah, couldn't have put it any better myself. And since we're here, if I may, can I ask you a question, Ben?
Go for it.
When you were saying that the browsers dictate, that the browsers dictate the accessibility tree, and that the operating systems also have their own accessibility tree. Does that mean that builds of browsers, say Firefox, on different operating systems have to conform to these?
Yes. Yeah.
Individually.
More or less, yeah. This is browser engineers are so damn good at their job, and we don't give them enough credit. Like, they are incredibly talented. Even the browsers you're thinking of, they are incredibly talented, and they do some really great work to make sure that websites are broadly compatible across operating systems. And so this is a key part of that, is like they are building such that your website is exposed correctly based on the given operating system.
That is remarkable. I had never thought that. I mean, like, one thing is like making sure that the app runs on different operating systems, but the fact that they also have to conform to the accessibility APIs of each operating system is mind-blowing. Remarkable. Thank you. People are liking the even the browsers you're thinking of.
I mean, that comment was specifically directed towards you, Mayank. I knew that was coming up. So I had to, call you out. You were in the audience. I knew what you were thinking. But
love it.
Yeah, no, this is one of the absolutely remarkable things that browsers do. And I think it's so interesting just because, like, they have to solve the problem of there are, websites are built, decades ago with practices that now we would cower in fear over, right? Like, surely no one's using layout tables these days. And even if no one makes a new website that uses layout tables, there's still old, unmaintained websites just out there that folks still are going to stumble across, and that still needs to be a pleasant experience. And so, yeah, browsers are building in all this like backwards compatibility for outdated patterns and stuff like that, just to make sure that the experience isn't a total bust for real users. And I think that is an incredible, admirable effort.
Yeah, definitely makes me really turn around and really appreciate. Platypus says the browser I'm thinking of is Lynx, which,
Well, I
if
have
I'm not
nothing to say
mistaken,
about links. It's
that's a terminal-based browser, right?
got to be.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sounds right. Yeah, no, this stuff is so cool, and I love this talk for so many reasons. Like it's got like if I can gush about this talk for a bit. I think it has a few like actionable tidbits where it's like suddenly you learn a few concrete things about specific ways that like CSS can impact accessibility. So down the road you can go, ooh, I don't know if we want to make this all uppercase, or this we need to be careful with this pseudo element because it could get announced by screen readers, right? Or display none, right? Like if you've ever seen, maybe I needed to make this clearer in the talk. Like if you've ever seen the SR only or visually hidden utility classes, they exist because display none doesn't do what you think it does as far as screen readers are concerned, right? They are basically, they are hacks, right? Because we don't have a good way in CSS to just like hide things visually without also culling them from screen readers. And so it's like, well, so now you can have the context as to like why we need these classes perhaps, because display none isn't going to cut it if you're trying to hide content visually. But then also it goes into a bit of like, let me just expand your mental model of the magic that your browser is doing for you and the part that we play in all of that. I think that is, for me, that's an exciting talk, right? It's like, oh, there's a few really interesting examples, like specific examples that I can take away from, but then like also there's like this bigger picture narrative going on. Those are the talks I just live for.
Yeah. Telling a story and sort of like taking us on that story with you is something that I feel highly, highly compelling. And this is what this talk really delivered on, in my opinion. Yeah. Rizèl, I'd love to give you a chance to ask any further questions or offer any more feedback if you've got any.
I don't feel like I have any. The only question I had was, what does dinosaurs eat man? And now
it's a valid question.
Yeah.
But I thought it was great. I loved it. Like it was super engaging. You made connections really well. I like the cow path thing as well, because that's like a thing people say in Boston, that Boston was built with cow paths. So it was cool to talk about it in the sense of technology. But yeah, I don't have anything else.
Same here, but we do have a question from Mayank, which is, my only question is, when are you writing a book, Ben?
Right?
And I don't know if the book is the right medium for me.
That's fair.
That's fair, yeah.
But I do blog at benmyers.dev, and I stream. So I do other forms of content, just not quite book content yet.
Did I get it right? Let me just scroll up in the chat, because I think I tried to shout out. Is this the correct semantic dev?
Yes.
So, folks, if you want to watch Ben stream, you can find them here at Semantics Dev.
But if you just put all your blog posts together, and then that'll be a book of Ben's blog posts.
Like a short essays book.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I was sitting at Walden Pond, pondering the lake, pondering the trees, and I thought, damn, I know how to do accessibility trees better than this.
I mean, no one's going to doubt that.
So good.
Love it. Love it.
Homie's absolutely correct. Y'all are doing a fantastic service by letting people come on and just give their absolutely exciting presentations. This whole series has been incredibly fun, and seriously, like, mad kudos to both of y'all for putting this together and for creating such an excellent environment for that. It's excellent.
Put us to Ramon. This was his idea. I'm just
No, I
tagging
couldn't do it without.
along.
No. I couldn't do it without Rizèl. And no, that means the world to me. And if I may very cheekily plug us, folks, we're always open to have y'all on. Even, I'd love to bring on folks who are interested in public speaking as well, or maybe have a talk coming up soon. What This is a place for y'all to feel comfortable to come in and give your talk to friends, give your talk in a as close to a meetup environment as we can across the internet as possible. And we don't bite. We have a very clear, only kind, constructive feedback. If you want to do that, please DM either Rizèl at Black Girl Bites on Twitter. Look at me point. Am I pointing correctly? Ever since you made that tweet, Rizèl, about how like the thing is
I think you are. I don't know.
So.
Every time I rewatch, I'm like the
Okay.
opposite way.
So at Black Girl Bites on Twitter, or DM me at hola_soy_underscore milk. Oh my goodness, I can't talk. And yeah, like please get in touch. If you want to get in touch with Ben, if I may suggest, please get in touch with them at Ben D. Myers. And yeah, I think that's all we got for today. Any thoughts as we go out?
Test early, test often, test on a variety of devices. You'll be amazed what you uncover.
There you have it, folks. Thank you both so much for this. Thank you all for tuning in today, offering your feedback, offering your comments. This is a joy to do, and I appreciate each and every one of you so much. So until then, take care and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.